My name is Patrick Doherty. I am the Deputy Director of the American Strategy Program here at the New America Foundation. I'm glad you all could make us. I think it's a very important event. Today, the New America Foundation and the organization Terror Free Tomorrow are pleased to release what we think is a very powerful poll of Pakistani public opinion. The poll was developed in consultation with the New America Foundation and conducted by our partner Ken Ballen and the organization Terror Free Tomorrow. Peter Bergen, I need to note just off the top of my remarks, did not play any role in either the development or the administering of the poll, and appears today here with his analyst hat on. This poll and this event is part of a larger effort led by Peter Bergen and by Steve Call, our president and CEO here at the New America Foundation, to demythologize the rhetoric surrounding terrorism and insurgency, and find new, more effective and sustainable policies that address the root causes of the popular support for extremism around the world. Our colleague Nick Schmidle, who received General Musharraf's Schmidle, thank you, Nick, who received General Musharraf's version of the Pulitzer Prize when he was deported for his New York Times Magazine cover story on the next generation of the Taliban. Nick has been working hard to uncover these deeper narratives within Pakistan as well. Our partnership with Ken Ballen and his team at Terror Free Tomorrow provides a critical insight into the attitudes of the people the U.S. policies are supposed to help. Public attitude surveys help shape a narrative of the population they query. So as Ken, Peter, and Nick brief you on the poll results and their meeting, I want each of them to tell us how these new numbers should affect the dominant narrative of Pakistan that dominates conversation and policymaking here in Washington. Today, I think that narrative is very skewed. When Senators Obama and McCain talk about Pakistan, they're more likely to be talking about al-Qaeda's hideout in the federally administered tribal areas and how to go about ending that hideout. Others focus on Pakistan's role in nuclear proliferation. But there's another narrative in Pakistan that I would argue is more important for the United States to pick up. It is the narrative New York Times reporter James Traub covered earlier this month in the New York Times Magazine, is the homegrown liberal democracy movement led by Pakistan's lawyers. Indeed, today's political churning was triggered by Supreme Court Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, who in turn was supported by a boycott of the courts led by the lawyers and judges in the nation's Bar Association. The opportunity for Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif to challenge Musharraf in the polls was, to a very real extent, created by the lawyers' rebellion, not the return of the Taliban. I want to make sure that we remember this point as we dig into the polls. The biggest force, what are the big forces for change in Pakistan today? Where do we need to be focusing our bipartisan analysis for policy? I hope our panelists today can address the strategic questions as well as the specific meeting as we go into the by-elections in Pakistan. And always return to both of these narratives. But let's get on to the results. I'll call Ken up to brief us on the polling. A quick note on Terror Free Tomorrow and their track record in Pakistan. You'll remember that the February 2008 polls were determined to be surprisingly unrigged by General Musharraf. We can say proudly that this was in no small part because of Terror Free Tomorrow's work. They conducted a pre-election poll. And that poll did two things. One, its release helped deter Musharraf from actually rigging the vote. And after the election, confirmed the accuracy of the results. Ken, let's try to do something like that again. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Patrick, and thanks to New America. Thank you, Peter and Nick. How do we work? Is this going to do the PowerPoint? Okay. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. There are two, Patrick spoke about narratives. There are two narratives that you can take from the polling results that we just completed in Pakistan. One is on the issue of support for al-Qaeda and American policies in terms of al-Qaeda. And that we see that the Pakistani people strongly want to negotiate with al-Qaeda, the Pakistani Taliban, and the Afghan Taliban. and that support for al-Qaeda has risen since earlier in the year. The second, equally important set of findings concerns the political situation now in Pakistan and what people think about it. Nawaz Sharif and his popularity has risen tremendously in Pakistan from when we started measuring it. 86% of Pakistanis now have a favorable opinion of him. And I'll talk about that later on and how he stands in reference to Mr. Zardari, who's the primary leader of the PPP, and other officials inside Pakistan. Both of those are separate narratives linked to, but they go to the bottom line of what the poll found. Let me go through briefly with you the results and give you 3 myths at the end of my discussion that this poll should bury once and for all in the debate that we have here and across the world. I urge you all to go to the actual poll itself. Most of you are astute students of Pakistan, and the poll is comprehensive, long. There's a lot of methodologies. It's 92 pages, but it's all up there for everyone to look at. As Patrick mentioned, we collaborated with New America on the poll, and it was done inside of Pakistan by the Pakistan Institute of Public Opinion, which is an affiliate of Gallup Pakistan. And they were the ones who've done, this is our 3rd poll in 9 months, and they've done the previous 2, so the methodology is consistent. And the sampling was both urban and rural, which is very important in proportion to the population. We also did an oversample which is more people in the Northwest Frontier Province, which is on the front line of what is happening in terms of where al-Qaeda and the Taliban are based. Well, as I mentioned, bottom line is the Pakistani government has begun a policy that's raised much concern here in Washington of negotiating with certain Pakistani Taliban fighters and their representatives in the Northwest Frontier Province and in the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan. Well, the Pakistani people would go a lot further than their own government. They want to negotiate with Arab and Uzbek al-Qaeda fighters. They want to negotiate with Afghan Taliban fighters and Pakistani Taliban fighters. They do not support their own military or the United States military taking any action against these fighters. And we see that favorable opinion of al-Qaeda is back up. It was at 18% in January of 2008. It's back up to nearly a third, at 32% today. Osama bin Laden is gaining as well in favorable opinion. He's not up to the level he was in last August. An interesting question we asked people was what they perceived, what they thought was the top goal of al-Qaeda and bin Laden in terms of their purposes. And 80% of Pakistanis said standing up to America was the top goal. 57% of Pakistanis said they agreed with that specific al-Qaeda goal of standing up to America. And they associate al-Qaeda with that. Who do you consider most responsible for the violence that is occurring in Pakistan today? Well, you can see from that rather dramatic result that the United States of America, most people blame the United States of America for the violence that is occurring in Pakistan. Suicide attacks that have been apparently at the hands of al-Qaeda or the Pakistani or Afghan Taliban, nobody holds them responsible. You can see the very low numbers there. We also went a step further, asked people, who do you think, which countries or groups might pose the greatest threat to your own personal safety? Again, the United States came out as the clear winner, or frankly, clear loser in this regard. Arch rival, Pakistani arch rival India was a distant second, and then we see that the people who might really be responsible, the people in our poll said, are not. This does not mean that people in Pakistan want al-Qaeda and bin Laden to rule them. Unfortunately, the numbers seem to be up a little bit from last time we asked this question, would you vote for them on the ballot? But it's still a small percentage. Which party would you vote for? We asked if the by-elections, which are scheduled for next week, were to occur at the time of our poll, who would you vote for? This is a very interesting shift in Pakistani public opinion since the February 18th elections. We see that Mr. Sharif's party, the PMLN, Pakistan Muslim League, is now the most popular party in Pakistan. It's up 42% said they would vote for it. Look at that trend. August 2007, 15% of Pakistanis said they would vote for the Pakistan Muslim League. January, right before the elections, 25%. Our poll mirrored, they got about 25% or in the actual elections on February 18th. Now look, they're up to 42%. The PPP, which 37% in January, is down slightly, but it's really the rise of the Pakistan Muslim League that's very significant. This is another amazing chart that illustrates it. Look at what happened to the favorable ratings among Pakistanis of Mr. Sharif. From 57% in August, they jumped to 74% in January. They're now up to 86%. Look at his unfavorables. They've dropped from 35% in August down steadily to 18%. Now they're only at 11%. What the actual poll will also show you is extremely significant in my point of view, which is that the very favorable ratings of Mr. Sharif are now at 43%. No other politician, including the Chief Justice, no one else comes close in Pakistan to that. And Mr. Zardari is at 13%, very, very favorable, just to give you the gap. Zardari's overall favorable, unfavorable ratings have held pretty much steady. Another person whose trend is obvious is President Musharraf. His favorable ratings continue to drop on a steady climb. They didn't start in August from a very high point, but they're continuing to drop, and his unfavorable ratings are continuing to climb. So he's not only very unpopular right now in Pakistan, but to the extent that anyone's left who likes him, that's diminishing even further. Why is all this happening? Well, this is perhaps, in my view, the most disturbing finding of the poll. The percentage of Pakistanis who face difficulty obtaining flour for their daily food consumption, 86% of Pakistanis in our poll said they face difficulty, primarily because of the high price of flour. This is interesting. They don't hold the United States responsible for this. Since the United States is held responsible for a lot of the ills in Pakistan today, they might have been held responsible for the price of food. They're not. But the Pakistani government is. You see, most people hold the Pakistani government responsible, and the trader and flour mill owners come in second place. American and Western agricultural policies are not held responsible by a very large percentage, nor we gave them the chance to talk about India. People didn't bite on that. Are these views of the United States immutable? No, they're not. What policies, we asked, there's a long series, I've just highlighted several in the slides, but we asked a whole bunch of questions. What would improve your opinion of the United States? And you can see for most Pakistanis, including those who say they support bin Laden, American disaster relief, medical aid, support for school construction, teacher training, free trade, visas to come to the United States, educational scholarships, there's more, are there. And I urge you to consult the full poll results. So, I'm going to conclude by saying, what does this mean? Well, my biggest conclusion is that leave it to Nick Schmidle and Peter Bergen to tell you what it means, and I can just sit down. But I'll give you a couple of thoughts on it. One, an obvious question would be, why has the positive feelings towards Al-Qaeda risen since January? I'm not sure that I know completely. I would say this, that I think to a large degree some of the feelings about this are reflective of the level of violence that's occurring in the country. When we took our last poll, it was weeks after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, and the country was in a tremendous turmoil and had seen a lot of suicide attacks. which have died down to some degree since then, so perhaps that's the reason. But again, Nick and Peter are going to have much more expert analysis than I can on that. But I will want to say something. This poll and other polls we've done and other people have done and other data that's been collected should finally put to rest 3 persistent myths that irk me, that I keep seeing repeated over and over again in the presidential debate, in columns of newspapers, on cable news, no, not on CNN, but on cable news. 3 myths that are constantly repeated that this data should put the final nails in the coffin in, because they're just simply not true. The first is that anti-American feelings don't matter. That somehow in dealing with extremism and terrorism around the world, anti-American feelings are insignificant, they can be overlooked, it's not really important. Well, we saw in these numbers pretty clearly that the prime driver for people thinking well of al-Qaeda, that's driving the popular support for bin Laden, al-Qaeda, is anti-American feelings. That is the bottom line. Whether you like it or not, who would like it? But it happens to be supported by the data. And why does it matter? We have a democratically elected government in Pakistan right now. They have to be sensitive to public opinion, just like our government is sensitive to public opinion. We constrict their space to operate when the United States is viewed as as the prime motivator for people supporting the extremism. So it matters a great deal what people think of the United States, and it's time we bury that myth. Myth number 2, anti-American views are intractable. No matter what we do, we can't change them. Well, I think you saw by that last series of slides, even for people who are bin Laden supporters, they willingly say that with new American policies, they would change their point of view. Not only is that a poll result, but we saw after the earthquake in Pakistan a demonstration of that, and we have the data that backs that up. Myth number 3, which is related to myth number 2, is, and the president even repeated this recently, President Bush, they hate us for our freedoms. That's the line we hear constantly, or less so now, but we still hear it. It's just manifestly untrue. The top priorities that Pakistanis pick for their government, the very top priority is an independent judiciary. That's the number 1 priority. Even above the economy, even with those flour prices that people are upset about, they pick independent judiciary, number 1. Number 2, close behind, is economy. 3, free elections, free press. They want democracy very deeply. So obviously they, quote, don't hate us for our values. That's just ridiculous. Because the people who, the priorities that Pakistanis are picking share a similar set of values to what the United States purports to represent. And it was even more stunning from our last poll on Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis said they share these values of democracy. And the most unpopular policy that Saudis picked was the American promotion of democracy in the Middle East. No one supported that. That was more unpopular than even the war in Iraq. So while the people in Saudi Arabia said they want democracy, they admire democracy, they admire the values that America stands for, they do not want the United States imposing that on them. With that note.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ken. It's powerful numbers. I'm going to call on Peter Bergen to go next. Peter, as you all know, is our Schwartz Senior Fellow here, but he's also CNN's Senior Terrorism Consultant, and we're happy to have him here to interpret what the good numbers that Ken has been working on. So thank you. Take it away, Peter.
Okay, well, I just wanted to sort of give some thoughts about the numbers. I mean, one thing that's very puzzling about Pakistan, in my view, is there were more suicide attacks in Pakistan in 2007 than there have been since 9/11. In fact, more Pakistanis had died in violence caused by militants in 2007 than had died between 2001 and 2006. And I think it's fairly obvious who is doing this violence. It's Pakistani Taliban, it's jihadi groups, it's people affiliated with al-Qaeda. And the numbers this year, 2008, 19 suicide attacks already this year, according to AFP. So the violence has sort of gone down a little bit, but it's still pretty intense. And of course, much of this violence is directed at the Pakistani state, because most of the people who get killed in this are Pakistani policemen, Pakistani soldiers, Pakistani politicians, most notably, of course, Benazir Bhutto on December 27th of last year. Now, I was in Pakistan the day after she was killed, and I was puzzled by something, which is Benazir's assassination was really the equivalent of the JFK assassination and 9/11 rolled into one. I mean, I was in Karachi, which is a city of 15 million people, and there was no one on the streets for 3 or 4 days. And there was really, the country really went into a period of national mourning, and a journalist at one of the Karachi newspapers, a younger Pakistani guy, said to me, "Why is it that we haven't dealt with this problem? You know, we know where it's coming from. Whatever the government may say, or whatever the conspiracy theorists may say, it's fairly obvious where the problem's originating. It's in the tribal areas. It's blowback from Pakistani support of jihadi groups in Kashmir. And previously, the blowback, I mean, this was being exported either to places like London, where people who were trained in the tribal areas conducted the largest terrorist attack in British history on July 7th, 2005, or it was being exported over the border into Afghanistan. And the United Nations released a very detailed report, basically saying that many of these suicide attackers come from Pakistan. And in fact, I've interviewed one of these suicide attackers when I was in Kabul last year. I interviewed a failed suicide attacker, which is about as good a definition of failure as any other. And he said that he was from Banu in Pakistan. He was a 20-year-old goat herder. He believed in the 72 virgins. He was reacting to the foreign occupation of Afghanistan as he saw it. He'd never been to Afghanistan, by the way, his first trip in from Pakistan into Afghanistan. So he is fairly typical of the kinds of suicide attackers that are being deployed in Afghanistan. Obviously, when a group attacks a Serena hotel or tries to kill Hamid Karzai, that is at a much higher level. But most of the suicide attackers in Afghanistan, unlike the ones in Iraq, are quite unsophisticated people from the tribal areas. So we know where this is coming from. And going back to the question that this Pakistani journalist asked me is, why haven't we got a handle on this problem? And I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Because it would seem to me we've run this experiment in other countries where it doesn't matter if the bombs go off in a country other than your own, you don't really care about it. Let's be real. Let's be frank about it. It took 9/11 for the United States to really wake up to this problem of Al-Qaeda. And so it's only when bombs go off domestically that you actually start taking real measures. And we've seen this in Indonesia. It took after the Bali attack of 2002, it took the attack on the JW Marriott in Jakarta, the attack on the Australian embassy, and the second wave of the Bali attacks in 2005, for the Indonesian government, the Indonesian public, and for Indonesian clerics to basically completely do a 180 on their view of Jemaah Islamiyah. It took the attacks on the 3 American-owned hotels in Jordan and Amman in 2005 that killed mostly Jordanians attending a wedding party for Jordanians to really turn against Al-Qaeda. There were spontaneous street demonstrations. Saqqa, the town where Zarqawi comes from, condemned him by name. We've seen this in Saudi Arabia, where Prince Nayef, the older Prince Nayef, had on a number of occasions said that 9/11 was a Zionist plot. May 2003, the attacks start being directed against Saudi citizens, Saudi oil facilities, and Western people living in Saudi Arabia, and that again produced 180 change in Saudi policy. And to some degree, we've also seen this in Iraq, where suicide attackers, mostly foreigners, have killed something like 10,000 Iraqis, and as you know, in places like Anbar and many other parts of Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Iraq has really taken serious amounts of hits because of its policies. So that brings me back to this question. Why is it that Pakistan hasn't really, in my view, dealt with this problem? I'd be interested from either Suja or Khalid, maybe to get their opinions on this. And maybe one answer to this is that the two approaches that have been used in the past have both been failures. The first approach in the 2003 to 2005 was an exclusively military approach. Now, the Pakistani military, which is obviously prides itself on its great military expertise, was really militarily defeated, in my view, when it went into the Fatah in 2003, 2004, 2005. Took large numbers of casualties, 700 up to 1,000 perhaps, and didn't get the job done, to put it mildly. Then there was a policy from 2005 to 2006 of appeasement. And I was on the other side of the border a week after the second Waziristan Accord was signed, and believe me, there were more rockets coming over a week after it was signed than before. And you know that General Eikenberry publicly said that attacks had gone up 300% after the second Waziri Accord. So the all-military approach and the all-appeasement approach hasn't worked. Now the Pakistani government is now in a kind of new phase, and obviously we have a democratically elected Pakistani government. We have the ANP in the northwest frontier, which I think is very significant. Perhaps Nick will probably talk about that in more detail, because with the MMA gone, you've got a Pashtun group that isn't sort of religious in nature, which I think has a lot more credibility on these issues. But it seems to me that the Fatah problem for Pakistan is one of these problems which is very, very difficult to solve, not amenable. I mean, you know, the literacy rate for females in the Fatah is 2 or 3%. So if you look at the problem that we have in southern Afghanistan, I think the problem is Fatah in terms of getting a handle on all the various economic issues and is enormously difficult. So the question is, what should that policy be? And I can't really tell you right now, because I think that's such a complicated question. Clearly the United States has a policy. Part of it is to arm the Frontier Corps and give them money. And you see from Jane Perlez's piece in the New York Times 2 days ago that this attack on the that killed the 11 Pakistani paramilitary soldiers has basically maybe, you know, that program is perhaps in serious jeopardy. There's also $750 million the United States is going to put into the Fatah, and over the next 5 years the Pakistani government is going to put in even more money. But you know, just throwing money at the problem is probably, you know, I think we've seen that it doesn't necessarily yield very many results. And I think one problem the Pakistanis suffer from is that despite I've raised this issue with my senior Pakistani military official, the Pakistani military doesn't appear to have a counterinsurgency doctrine. And he said, well, we do, but I don't see much evidence of that. And it took several years for the United States to really get its own counterinsurgency doctrine back that we'd forgotten about. And this is something, you know, the Pakistani military set up for a land war with India, not a counterinsurgency problem on its western border. And so that seems to be part of the problem and part of the solution going forward. On the negotiations, you know, these striking numbers, about 50% of Pakistanis would negotiate with the Pakistani Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. That is a pretty striking number. But when we look at these numbers, I think it's important to remember that we have a policy of negotiation. The United States effectively has a policy of negotiation, or the Afghan government has a policy of negotiating with the Afghan Taliban in Afghanistan. So if it's good enough on one side of the border, why isn't it good enough on the other side of the border? In fact, one of the most successful things that we've done in Afghanistan is the amnesty program that we have for the Afghan Taliban. Thousands of people have taken advantage of this. I've seen how this goes down, you know, somebody's released from Bagram Air Force Base, senior, you know, mid-level Taliban, let's say, he's released to a group of tribal elders, his family, he publicly abjures violence, he signs on, says, I'm going to support the Afghan government. It's very difficult for him to go back on that because so many other people have had to sort of vouch for him. And so that policy is, I think, potentially a very good policy. So we shouldn't just sort of say, well, these are all bad people we shouldn't be negotiating with, because after all, that's exactly the same policy we're doing in Iraq. The sons of Iraq were all shooting at us a year ago. They're now all shooting at Al-Qaeda. So this idea of negotiations is potentially a useful one if it really yields results. And so I think the jury is still out with the Pakistani negotiations. Is it really going to yield foreign fighters, members of Al-Qaeda, people like Bayatullah Masood, or not? And I'm not holding my breath on that one. One other thing that this poll raises, which I think is a very important one, is if 52% of Pakistanis thinks the violence in their country is because of the United States, and only 11% think it's because of India, where, you know, the conspiracy theories about India are rampant, and vice versa, and about Pakistan and India, why is that? I mean, that's a very puzzling, and there are perhaps three reasons. One is there is an enormous culture, forgive me for saying this to my Pakistani friends, a culture of conspiracy exists in Pakistan about certain things. A lot of things are attributed to RAW, the Indian intelligence agency, but it's interesting now that these problems are being attributed to the United States. Then, of course, there is the very real fact that we are killing Pakistanis with Hellfire missiles. Imagine if Mexico sort of routinely was killing Americans in Nuevo Laredo or whatever you know, how we feel about Mexican incursions into sovereign American territory. And finally, I think this is something that your poll did demonstrate, can tell me if I'm wrong, is that the view that the global war on terror really is a war on Islam is very widely held. I'm not saying that these are the answers to this question. I'm just positing maybe they are part of the answer, and I'm puzzled by this result.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Now we're going to turn to Nick Schmidle and get his thoughts on this. Nick, take it away.
All right. So I think the situation overall in Pakistan right now is one of confusion and something that to some extent the poll results reflect. Right now, who really knows who's in charge in Pakistan right now? I think that's one of the biggest questions at this point. We know that Musharraf has lost, over the past year, a lot of his mojo that he had a year ago. Zardari is obviously behind the scenes and is a very powerful player, but is he the ultimate player? Where's the prime minister in all this? Where's Kiani? Kiani, you know, with the time, even actually as we sat here at this table in January for a similar panel, I think that Steve Call raised the point that Kiani will define Pakistan over the next year, and Kiani has just kind of disappeared from the news coverage over the past several months. So where's Kiani played in all this? Now, I do find it fascinating that and I saw this a little bit over the 2 years that I was there as well, but that the focus and the attention shifting from the eastern border to the western border. People in Lahore, people in Karachi will still offer conspiracy theories about what's wrong with Pakistan and still blame it on the Indians. But the minute you cross the Indus, there was always that division, well, now it's coming from the Americans. Now it's sort of blowback that's coming across the border. And I think that now increasingly you see that line has crossed eastward of the Indus and is pushing into Karachi and Lahore as well and affecting more of the populous areas and not just the western half. Regarding the insurgency never really reached a breaking point. It never, in the same way that right now gas prices haven't reached a breaking point where anything really radical is going to happen to change America's energy policy, the insurgency was getting to the point where it was beginning to kill and to claim casualties of people's, wives or sisters who just happened to be at the market at the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was really only in late December, early January, there were a couple of bombs in Lahore. I think literally on the day that we were getting on the airplane, someone had said that there were 30 people that were killed in Lahore and on the mall. But this was right sort of as the end, right? You couldn't say it was fizzling out because they eventually cut a peace deal. I think the Taliban were ready to continue going on. But it never got there. Now, it's a terrible thing to say that that more people have to die for there to be an effective counterinsurgency policy drafted or for public opinion to change. But I do feel like right now the Taliban Al-Qaeda threat has receded. It still is affecting tribals. It still is affecting life in the tribal areas. It still is affecting the security forces, but it's no longer affecting citizens in Lahore and Karachi who are perhaps 6 months ago may have been scared to tell their son to go, buy mangoes in the market or whatever. The other thing that it reflects is the difference, and this is not particular to Pakistanis by any means, but the difference between looking at things in abstraction and looking at things sort of with hard on-the-ground facts. Consider just anecdotally consider how the opinion of Lal Masjid and Abdul Rashid Ghazi, the head of the Red Mosque, changed from, say, the last week of June until the last week of July. Ghazi died the second week of July. So, and you had a 10-day standoff in the middle there. The last week of June, as they had just kidnapped these Chinese masseuses and sort of defied, the other thing the poll shows is that the Chinese are incredibly, incredibly popular in Pakistan. I think 84% gave them favorable or very favorable ratings. And that's mainly because the Chinese seem like they're independent of the Americans, the same reason that the Iranians polled incredibly high. They stand up to the Americans, it wins them favor. So anyways, right after the Red Mosque their people were going and kidnapping Chinese masseuses and kind of launching this anti-vice campaign in the city, they were dirt. Their popularity was nothing. And yet, once Abdul Rashid Ghazi died, then he became abstract. And then he became a martyr, and then he became a hero. And at the end of June, you couldn't have found a good thing about him in the newspapers, and by the end of July, he was being lionized. So I think that there's a little bit of that aspect as well. Think about the fact that 36% of people support al-Qaeda and believe that al-Qaeda's agenda is killing Americans, and 36% support that agenda. So there's the abstraction of that, even American civilians are targets. And yet, 73% said that suicide bombings are never justified. And suicide bombings are in many ways the sort of hallmark of al-Qaeda's tactics. So you've got this, again, this split between what actually al-Qaeda means up here and what al-Qaeda means when it's blowing stuff up on the ground. Nawaz Sharif, and this, I put Nawaz Sharif and the judicial crisis together at this point, because both of them, Nawaz Sharif has very, very deftly and successfully aligned himself with the abstraction of a free judiciary. One of the polling numbers said that they listed a number of personalities who were not currently, will not be on the by-election polling list, and one of them was Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry, the suspended Chief Justice, and it said, if he was on the polling list, would you vote for him? If he formed his own party, and 50% said that they would. So Nawaz Sharif, you've got this has gained a lot of popularity. Nawaz Sharif has identified himself with this, and people have kind of temporarily forgotten the Nawaz Sharif of the late 1990s, as he was, trying to name himself Amir al-Mu'mineen, this sort of defender of the faithful and whatnot. The same thing reflects with the People's Party. It's just a sort of curse of incumbency, and these hardships are thus identified. Whether it's the People's Party, if Nawaz Sharif if Nawaz Sharif right now was the prime minister, the economic crisis would probably be much the same, and Nawaz Sharif would probably also be blamed. I think that it's just whoever happens to be in power at the time. Regarding the MMA suffered a similar thing. The MMA I think actually polled lower than al-Qaeda in terms of popularity. The MMA being the Islamist coalition that ruled the Northwest Frontier Province in Baluchistan from 2002 to 2007. So so that we can give some time to questions, I'll end here. But I do want to say something about salvaging goodwill and how the United States can repair its image. You're right about after following the earthquake that the numbers in support of the United States jumped. I actually think that Ambassador Haqqani was the one who wrote an op-ed piece at the time mentioning that in the Washington Post or the New York Times. But the difficulty is, those numbers then fell 6 months, 8 months later. The difficulty is trying to consolidate and trying to hold on to those gains. And so I do think that goodwill can have a positive effect, but the question is, how do you do that without thus having a sustained and prolonged, whether it be American military presence in Azad Kashmir helping people, or in other disaster-stricken areas. So with that, we'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to get quickly to the questions in the audience, because this is, I think, the folks that we have in the audience really have a lot of expertise that I want to bring up. So, gentlemen, I'd turn it right over to you. We're going to do questions. If you could just identify yourself and your affiliation, any questions you have for all three here. Richard, why don't you start off with you?
Richard White's Hudson Institute. A couple of years ago, the rules of engagement by which U.S. forces were basically operating across the border, or at least engaging and defending themselves from attacks across the border, came out in some of the in the public, and it appears that those may have changed. And I'm not sure. I was wondering if you have any sense of that about rules, say, using predators, special forces, defending themselves. Is there a limit to how far they can go across the border? I know this has become an issue in all sorts of ways. Karzai with the Pakistani government. I'd be interested in any insights you might have on that.
So the question for our television audience is to what extent have the rules of engagement for American incursions across into Pakistan changed, and how does that impact the politics?
I think, I don't know if there's any well-defined rule book of the rules of engagement. I think that it changes on a literally minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis. I was speaking with a special forces operator who was based in Afghanistan and said that there were a number of times when they would literally load up into a helicopter, plane to cross the border and go after top al-Qaeda leaders, and would kind of be on the walkie-talkie as they were loaded up in the helicopter, and someone in Islamabad would say no, and they'd turn the helicopter around and go back to base. There were other occasions, though, where there was kind of, like you suggested, there might have been a buffer there, a buffer where the leaders in Islamabad may have said afterwards, well, you shouldn't have gone there and done that, but it was kind of more of a slap on the wrist thing. And so I think that the rules of engagement, because they're so vague, at this point, no one knows whether you're supposed to ask for permission or forgiveness. And it creates the difficulties we saw a few weeks ago where, you know, this alleged killing of these 11 FC forces / Taliban. I mean, this weird video from the Pentagon showing them firing RPGs off the mountaintop, and then the Pentagon, it was a fairly convincing video that, okay, so these guys were not good guys, and yet the next day the Pentagon said, there might have been some more video footage that we didn't release, but it never was released, so.
Ken, I want to take it to you. I mean, it seems like American policy is so much focused on the on dealing with the tribal areas, but at the same time, the most important issues for the Pakistani people are A, the judiciary, and B, the economy. To what extent do you think if the United States made a really substantive and material effort either on supporting an independent judiciary or improving economic growth in Pakistan, would it impact probably what are going to be ongoing operations of this sort in the Fatah?
You know, as Peter pointed out, I mean, it's hard to have a good opinion of a country when you're being attacked. So if Hellfire missiles are coming over into Pakistan, I think that's going to permanently damage American-Pakistani relations. However, if there were other policies, you know, I think our results and experience after the earthquake clearly point to, I don't think this has to be the case that there's anti-American or pro-extremist feelings in Pakistan. I think it can change, and I think American policies can make a big difference. But one of the policies we are going to have to come to grips with is how to effectively deal with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban inside of Pakistan, and how we can do that in cooperation with the Pakistani government.
Okay.
Because if we're doing it against the Pakistani government, we're simply not going to succeed.
Thanks. Back to the floor. Sir in the back. Yep.
Alan Nichols. Karzai has said...
Could you identify your affiliation
Yes,
too?
just myself.
Thanks.
Karzai just recently said he wants to go in and get the Taliban and Qaeda. How does that complicate things? Is he seen as a U.S. stooge? What's his relationship with the Pakistani government? How does that affect all what you're talking about?
So the question is, Karzai has recently come out in support of going after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and what does that do in terms of his political position in the region?
Well, I mean, Karzai has certainly said that, but I mean, how is he really going to affect that? The Afghan National Army is a long way from being an effective military force. I don't think he's going to provoke a land war with India, with Pakistan, which has nuclear weapons and a fairly massive army. I think that was more rhetorical than anything else, maybe a sense of frustration. I think it's important to remember that Karzai's father was killed in Quetta by the Taliban in 1999, at a time when the Taliban were firmly embedded with the Pakistani security services. So, I mean, there's some history there, and obviously no great love lost.
Okay. Sir.
Ben Deere, Center for American Progress. You talked about the poor state of things in Fatah with regard to economically and literacy rates. What are some specific steps that can be taken to improve that situation, the economy, integrate Fatah a little bit, and what role should the U.S. play in that as opposed to letting Pakistan be the primary driver?
So the question is, what can be done to improve the economic and political conditions in the Fatah?
I mean, I think that's probably the $750 million question, right? I mean, and so there is actually a $750 million U.S. aid package right now that's earmarked for education, social, and economic development in Fatah. And in speaking with State Department officials, they seem pretty confident that they have some people in Peshawar that are confident go-betweens. But the problem is that, you know, in Mohmand Agency, in North Waziristan and South Waziristan, the militants are dictating where the money gets spent, even if you're not particularly handing it over to Baitullah Masood or one of his lieutenants or you know, any one of the Taliban commanders that are in those areas. Things are still more or less under their control. To a lesser extent, also in Bajor, to a slightly lesser extent in Khyber and Orakzai Agency. And I don't know whether the State Department has readjusted its expectations, thinking that they can work in Orakzai and maybe perhaps set a model. But it's kind of a dire situation, Peter.
Well, two things. First of all, I mean, this is Pakistan, so it's any political changes has to come from the Pakistani government. And Harley, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you know, the government has repealed the 1901 or is in the process of repealing the 1901 Act that yeah, have they repealed it, or they're talking about it? Okay, well, so clearly that would be a big one, because that would reintegrate the FATA into Pakistan itself, which is really the long-term solution to this. The other thing which Nick touched on, which I think is a very powerful idea, is if you're going to do this at all, you have to do it in phases, and you start with the low-hanging fruit, which is Qaeda, which has the least of the problems, and then you lead north and south Waziristan to the last, and you sort of do it in phases. And I would like to add an idea that I've had and tried to promote, which is one of our biggest problems in this discussion. We know nothing about what is going on there. So this is not a particularly effective way to produce policy. And I think that one of the things that we should condition, if it's politically possible, with the Pakistani government, to say, look, we're giving this government, this money is conditional on two really pretty small things that cost you almost nothing, which is international observers, like International Crisis Group, or foreign journalists, and even Pakistani journalists should be allowed to go into FATA, take their own chances. Obviously, it's a little dangerous. But one of our main problems is we simply do not know what is going on there. Something that Dick Holbrook pointed out in congressional testimony, something that Del Daly has said publicly. So, if we don't have information, how do we know what to do? And I think that is the biggest single problem we face there. And if we could persuade the Pakistani government, as Nick found, the Pakistani government doesn't appreciate reporting on these subjects, and in fact, has turned down visas for reasons that aren't very clear. And even today, if you apply as a Pakistani American journalist, and it would be interesting to see if this has changed with the new government, you get an Islamabad or Karachi visa. So how do you possibly report on what's going on in these other places? And so I think a more open policy by the Pakistani government to coverage from both journalists and also from other interested NGOs would be very useful in this regard.
Can I just add a footnote to that? I mean, we're talking about FATA and the tribal areas, but the insurgency is now in the Northwest Frontier Province as well, SWAT and other areas, so that it's spread. So I think sometimes in the American media, there's a distinction drawn, maybe a distinction without a difference, unfortunately.
We're going to turn to Gary Mitchell in a second, but before we go there, gentlemen, at a very simplistic level, the previous rationale for Pakistani support of the Taliban in years past had been to give them strategic, essentially in-depth strategic balancing vis-a-vis India and Kashmir. To what extent was that ever true? Is it true today? Essentially that the support for the Taliban was really because of a longer game with India, and to what extent do we need to recognize that if we're going to deal with the insurgency in Fatah? Peter?
Well, I mean, before I'm going to make a very brief comment, that I'm going to ask Suja to comment, since he's written the definitive book on the Pakistani military and its relations to the Pakistani state. The strategic depth makes no sense when you have nuclear weapons. I mean, where are you going to retreat to if both countries have just gone up in smoke? This whole idea was, I think, a kind of strange idea in the first place, but India and Pakistan are not going to fight a major land war, in my view, for the foreseeable future or ever, because with nuclear weapons, it's either going to be a nuclear war or nothing. And so the strategic depth thing, which is something the Pakistani military seem to want to hold on to, doesn't make any strategic sense. Suja, do you?
I agree. In fact, the strategic depth idea was born out of the mind of General Muslim Beg in 1988, 89, and it was abandoned by his successors because the reason you're saying. First of all, you're not going to have a conventional war, and if you do, then you retreat to the mountains of Afghanistan, and the Indians take the GT road in Lahore and Gujranwala and Multan and whatever. The game's over. So it makes no sense in that context.
It makes no sense. Does it still drive relations with the Taliban? No.
There is another issue, which is that the Pakistani state does want to have some kind of a patron-client relationship with Kabul. And that was the original idea behind supporting the Taliban to have a quote-unquote friendly government in there. They do not regard the current government as being friendly to Pakistan because it has Karzai, who's a Pashtun, but they say that most of the rest of the government effectively is non-Pashtun. And that's the issue which is driving the support for the Taliban.
Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I think it actually began with their support of Hekmatyar. I mean, that was their horse in 92, 93. But the one thing is that from Islamabad's perspective, I mean, all the conspiracy mongering aside, outside the United States, people do have a little bit more of a historical memory than we do. And they've already seen the United States make a mess in Afghanistan and leave once. So it kind of makes sense for them to keep as many horses in the race as possible. And because if the United States leaves after 5 years for political pressures back home or whatnot, then at least they'll still say, oh, it's a good thing we didn't totally abandon the Taliban. We may have been double dealing them a little bit, and we may have ruffled their feathers in the early, from 01 to 07, but at least we still have a couple allies within the movement. So I think that's also potentially what you're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that raises a very important policy prescription, which is we need to say that we're going to be in Afghanistan for decades. If we're going to be in Afghanistan for decades, why not just make it clear? One of the things that was, I think, the least successful in this area was in 2005. A number of DoD officials said we're going to start drawing down. Now that may have been done for domestic purposes in the United States. It got zero attention here, but it affected the hedging strategies of all of Afghanistan's neighbors, because they think you're going. Well, why wouldn't they keep their bets on the Taliban, as Nick has pointed out? And so if we, I think clearly we're not going to make the mistake that we did in 1989, which is to close our embassy in Afghanistan and leave. We're going to be there for a very, very, very long time. And the fact that the Bush administration has sort of said we're now going to put in an extra 3,200 Marines, and as a new administration comes into power, the Democrats will control the House and Senate likely. Whether it's McCain or Obama, I think there'll be a drawdown in Iraq, which is going to free up more people for Afghanistan. And a way of saying we're going to be there for a long time is to put more troops in. Clearly, there aren't enough right now.
Okay, thank you. Gary Mitchell?
Thanks. Gary Mitchell from the Mitchell Report. I have the feeling that the question I want to pose, the answers have sort of been salted throughout this conversation, but I want to come back at it from a slightly different perspective and say that instead of meeting with this group today, if you were meeting with the new national security team of the 44th President of the United States, three things I'd like to ask you to think about. One is, okay, so we have this poll and we have all these observations we've been making. What are the three most important things that this tells the 44th President and his team about Pakistan? And second, what policy prescriptions does it suggest?
Okay, so just to quickly repeat, you're meeting with the 44th President. What's the new analysis here, and what policy prescriptions does it suggest? Start with Ken.
I'm going to cite a different finding in the poll and not directly answer your question, because I think it's extremely important. It underlies the point of where the people in Pakistan are. As Nick pointed out, they're not happy with the current government and what's going on. But support for the military in Pakistan, being involved in the political and civilian affairs of the country, has been dropping steadily. So in other words, while Pakistan is in trouble, the people are not turning to the military for the answer. And maybe that's why, Nick, you raised a question where General Kiani is kind of in the background. Maybe he's reading the tea leaves better than we are. And he sees that the support for that has diminished. And maybe that's a good silver lining legacy to Musharraf. So in other words, what I would tell the next president is that the people of Pakistan do share our values. They want a democracy. They want an independent judiciary. They want an economy that's thriving. I would talk about having a trade treaty with Pakistan where we can increase both imports and exports between our two countries. I would talk about having policies that create people-to-people relationships with Pakistanis, because that's going to make a big difference in the long run. The support for extremism is really quite soft, actually, when you peel away the numbers. And it's more of a protest vote, I think, over current conditions than anything else. So the numbers are not as bleak as they seem on the surface. And I think that military, who's supporting the military enough, is a very important finding.
Peter.
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, we're going to be in Afghanistan for the long term. We should make that clear. Also, Afghanistan and Pakistan are part of the same sort of set of problems or solutions. So just as it would be absurd to talk about Israel, we have an Israel-Palestine desk. We should need to have an Afghan-Pakistan desk, the State Department, DOD, and also look at these problems holistically. I mean, I can talk more about what we should do in Afghanistan, but we're talking about Pakistan. The other thing is, I think the Pakistani military does need a counterinsurgency strategy, and it gets to the findings of Ken's poll. Classic counterinsurgency is 20% military, 80% other measures. So whether those measures are negotiations, amnesties, bringing people into the political process, economic development, whatever. I mean, you know what those measures usually are. And so the extent to which we can work with Pakistan to either create a counterinsurgency academy in Pakistan, or that may be problematic if it has anything other than a very light American fingerprints on it. Bring more Pakistani officials and Pakistani military officers to Fort Leavenworth or Fort Riley to learn about counterinsurgency. These kinds of ideas, I think, would be useful.
Nick.
The first thing I think would be regarding the deployment of foreign service officers is to lift these ridiculous travel restrictions on American foreign service officers and ambassadors that are in Islamabad, Karachi, and Lahore. You realize that besides the ambassador, who needs to be able to take his wife, or in this case, she's married? Ambassador Patterson? But the ambassador, if she's a woman, needs to be able to take her husband, so therefore they're allowed to bring spouses. Otherwise, all of these people are there by themselves, single, on typically one-year rotations, and they are not allowed to leave the diplomatic enclave, and or if they live in town, they live in one or two nicest and most sheltered sectors of the entire country. They're not allowed to go to the markets. They're not allowed to go for a jog. I mean, I can't tell you how many occasions I had where my wife and I would introduce ourselves, and they'd say, well, you're the first Americans, and you're just so down to earth, because we haven't had any interaction. I mean, this gets back actually to Obama's idea that, that this lack of dialogue is what's is what's exacerbating the problem right now, rather than trying to, puff our chest out and say, well, we don't talk to terrorists. I mean, there has to be engagement at every level. If you're going to engage at the upper level, then you also need to be engaging at the street level. The second thing is exposure in Fatah, as Peter mentioned. I mean, in 2 years of living in Pakistan, I think I probably spent at most 6 hours in Fatah, in one town that's kind of really easy to get to, that you can just drive off the main road there at Mkhail without really crossing into Fatah. I mean, it is dangerous, but if people are willing to take the risk, then, I mean, it would open up so much more space for the Pakistani government to seem like they're not hiding something there. The other thing is the U.S. perception of meddling in Pakistani affairs is so profound, and this poll actually reflected that the failure to restore the Chief Justice, the main culprit is seen as the United States, is the main culprit behind the failure to restore the Chief Justice. 2 days ago, there's a Harvard student who left Harvard right at the time of the state of emergency, came to Pakistan, and has kind of been one of the leaders of this student movement since the time of the emergency in early November. He was given an award earlier this week. As he goes onto the stage to receive the award, who was being handed out by none other than the American ambassador, she reaches out her hand, he ducks his head and walks right by her, and it was like front page news that this guy ignored the American ambassador and blew her off. So, I mean, this is a Harvard-educated kid. This is not some illiterate, conspiracy-mongering guy who thinks that the Americans are behind everything. So that's a profound perception that needs to be addressed and eventually changed.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Actually, I'm glad that Nick said this. I think the rise...
If you could identify yourself, sir, just for the...
Khalid Hassan, Daily Times correspondent in Washington.
Thank you very much.
Which is a Lahore-based newspaper. I think the rise in American unpopularity in Pakistan, it simply cannot be divorced
from the persistent, consistent support which the Bush administration has extended to General Musharraf, all through. There has not been a word of protest when the lawyers were being beaten up on the streets of Pakistan. Not one word of criticism, not even a comment when he sacked 60 judges. And the fact is that to this day, Pakistanis believe that he is in place because of United States backing. And therefore you cannot delink this. Do you know that in the massive movement, the lawyers' movement, and these massive marches, people marched for 20 hours and hundreds of thousands, not one anti-American slogan was raised, not one American flag was burned, never. It was the United States was not the issue. The issue was Musharraf, and the issue was the reinstatement of the judges. And unless the United States takes a position where it backs Musharraf's ouster and the reinstatement of the judges, which means you support constitutionalism, you support rule of law. But this ambivalence, not ambivalence, in fact, downright support.
Let's
for
turn that
Musharraf.
into a question. Gentlemen, what do you see as the
Sorry, I
likelihood?
didn't
Yeah,
finish.
go ahead.
Please. So unless this is done, there'll be a rise in anti-Americanism. I mean, that's the given.
And could you turn that into a question?
Well,
You want to go for it, Ken?
No. I think the findings of our poll are absolutely on point. They clearly indicate that the number one issue for the Pakistani, above the economy, even with 86% of people saying they're having trouble getting food to place on their table, that's a stunning finding. Above that was the independent judiciary. So I think you're absolutely right. What's driving this is this unity between the Bush administration and Musharraf, who is clearly now just is reviled in Pakistan.
I comment about that. I mean, the Bush administration stated policy in the global war on terrorism about how to deal with this big picture with democratization. Yet the world's second largest Muslim country, which actually happens to be a democracy for the last 60 years on and off, was a country where we chose to not do the things that Khalid was suggesting, which was, this was a long time coming. The people who thought that Musharraf was sort of the savior of our best bet in Pakistan should have seen as early as 2002 that this was a guy who was behaving in ways which were enormously anti-democratic, fixing elections so religious parties did better, having a kind of referendum on what a great guy he was, and then not taking off the uniform repeatedly after many promises. So, this didn't begin. The interesting thing about the Chief Justice crisis for me is this was the occasion, not the cause. The cause was much deeper. This was just the final straw. Pakistanis, middle class, ordinary Pakistanis have been stewing about this issue, Musharraf's kind of seizure of power for a very long time, and so that crisis was a long time coming, and it was strange that we didn't see it, and particularly given our own stated position on what the solution is in this part of in the global war on terrorism.
Nick, anything to respond?
I'll just make one quick comment, in that every once in a while during the lawyers' protest, they did throw out a couple of anti-American slogans, but they were only precisely because of America's backing of Musharraf. There's nothing overly bad in this.
Gentleman in the green shirt.
John Newhouse from the World Security Institute. The question occurred to me as I was listening to a recent comment by Mr. Ballen about the possibility of generating some productive contacts at the level of government security. That is to say, you mentioned the trade possibility of the trade agreement. I don't know whether anything like that is underway, but perhaps you can tell me whether it is. And if it isn't, with some governments and their embassies in Washington, they have great difficulty generating that sort of thing because they frankly don't have representation that has access to key players on Capitol Hill, both members and staff, or indeed in the State Department. Their access is too limited. What they do is they go out and some of them, many of them, in fact, hire lawyers and PR people to do this sort of thing for them. And that's some of that.
Okay, so the question is, to what extent, Ken, do you see the prospects for a trade increase in trade as part of the U.S. policy with Pakistan?
I don't know the answer. I just know that it would be something that Pakistanis want very badly, and they see it as helpful to their economic future. And this is similar to other countries.
Are we too focused on the military side of this, Peter? What do you think?
Well, actually, I was going to ask Ken a question, which was, okay, Bush is not going to be around for, that is coming to an end, and Musharraf's, is fading from the scene in a sense. And I know you can't answer this question, but I have an intuition about what the answer might be. With a new administration and also with Musharraf fading from the scene, do you think anti-Americanism in Pakistan will sort of magically disappear, or would it continue?
You're right, I can't answer.
My intuition is that anti-Americanism is sort of endemic in many countries, and that the question is, to what extent does it affect? I'm sure anti-Americanism in France is probably higher today than it is in Pakistan, for instance. But what does it mean for policy? And I guess that the question, what are the findings of the poll that imply for our policies in Pakistan vis-a-vis the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, do you think?
Well, and I think that is the link that we have in Pakistan that we don't have in France. So anti-Americanism in France has different effects for us, and I think there's a strong one. The poll shows us the anti-Americanism is driving a lot of the professed support, at least, for these groups.
Interesting. I was talking with some colleagues from the German government on this question of to what extent will a change in U.S. administration impact German public policy or public opinion towards the Afghanistan deployment, where 70% of the population is against expanding the deployment and even continuing the deployment. And the response was it won't even make a dent, that there will be no honeymoon in Germany for the next American president, because this is really about Germans' sense of their own strategic interests. It'll be interesting to see to what extent there's a honeymoon in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Sir.
Al Richmond, former State Department. I want to talk about anti-Americanism. Large multi-country surveys show that Pakistan public is nearly unmatched in its degree of antagonism toward the U.S., shown by some of these data. And I wondered, and on this panel, there has been mention of our government support for Musharraf. And there's also been mentioned the inconsistency of U.S. policy toward Pakistan. My own view is that
In the form of a question.
Yes,
would be great.
yes.
Great.
I'm looking for other explanations that can explain the degree of enmity Pakistani public has. In a way, I'm not satisfied yet with these explanations.
So what are some other explanations for the high levels of anti-Americanism? And Ken, if you could just kind of give us a reality check in terms of levels of anti-Americanism. What's the reality check here in terms of it compared to other countries where you've been working?
Well, it's worse in Turkey, for instance, which is an ally of ours in NATO. It's worse in Jordan. It's worse elsewhere too. So, I'm not sure Pakistan, and I think part of the feelings are somewhat soft and capable of changing, and so I'm not sure how deeply held it is. But I think it's hard to know what all the reasons are. It's certainly not a good thing that we've been the United States has been. India's been knocked off the traditional perch, and now we occupy it without any competition.
Yeah. As we've seen, these numbers can go up and down. So I would, a number that we haven't talked about, which I think is very significant in this discussion, is support, and Nick, I think, referred to it, is support for suicide bombing in Pakistan has just gone, it was 33% 5 years ago, it's 8% last year. I don't think those numbers are improving. And so while, as a sort of protest vote against the United States, admiration for bin Laden or Al-Qaeda may exist, when it comes to actually, bombs blowing up on your own doorstep, there's clearly the Pakistani public has turned against this kind of tactic because so much of it has happened domestically. And the question is, how does the Pakistani political establishment build on this and take this to the conclusion it seems that it should be, which is we've really got to end the people fomenting this on our western border.
Sir.
Yeah, Xiao Chen, freelance correspondent. In this Pakistan, who have a favorable opinion on Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, this period of the January 2008 is very unique because it's deep, but the before and after that period is up.
Okay.
Why?
It's very simple. It's Benazir Bhutto's assassination.
Thanks. Right back.
My question is something to do with something Nick Schmidle talked about. So, you talked about how you think there should be more interaction between the U.S. ambassador, so to speak, and journalists should be allowed to go into the FATA area and WFP. But I just want to talk about something in a sort of context of security concerns, which are the biggest thing in the United States right now. Don't you think that would be a violation on a micro level? And I just want to talk about how unsafe Pakistan is at this point in time, because in personal experience, I was back home in Karachi during the assassination, and I'm saying this as someone who grew up in Karachi in the 90s during ethnic conflict. I've never seen Karachi this unsafe historically, where you have right next to you in a car someone who's shooting outside the window. I mean, I've never felt that unsafe. And I just want to say that the value of an American life is much more than the value of a Pakistani life in Pakistan. I mean, 100 Pakistanis die, but they're just numbers. When an American dies, it's a face in Pakistan. How do you think that works out? I mean, don't you think it's an unreasonable expectation of the Pakistani government to allow something?
I think it's a very well taken point. In fact, last fall, my wife worked at the Serena Hotel, and she had just changed and put on a workout outfit. It was all long pants, all long sleeves, and she was walking out the front door of the Serena to go for a jog, and this retired American Army colonel who was doing some defense contracting and who sort of lived in the Serena, so whoever was paying him, I want to get on their payroll too. He said to my wife, he pulled her aside and he said, this would be the most selfish thing for you ever to do, to go out and run right now, because what if someone kidnapped you and you know how much it would cost you and how much it would set back Pakistan-American relations. And my wife was distraught, and you know, and I, to some extent, I do see where you're coming from, and I do see where he's coming from, and we look at the Daniel Pearl incident, and we see the way that it's set back. I mean, that was the rationale. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when I was expelled, deported, whatnot, they said we couldn't, in the aftermath of the Daniel Pearl incident, we simply couldn't allow such kind of reckless adventurism on the part of journalists. So, granted, they don't want that. I believe that they genuinely don't want that. They don't want that to happen again. But it's also a convenient way of keeping people out of certain places that they don't want eyes to be. And so, for instance, when I was in SWAT in October, it's one thing for Pakistani journalists to say, you know, I was yesterday watching the Taliban lash people, and, you know, the Taliban have got total control of their policing. It's another thing for there to be an American that says, you know, yeah, I was standing there in the middle of it too. They just kind of freak out, and they think, well, what if? So you're right, there is that aspect. And I just happen to believe that if you take the long view, you have to be diligent about it. You have to be careful. But there's no reason to keep people from going into the F6 market, which is this sort of very posh market in the middle of Islamabad. There's no reason to keep Americans from going there because you're worried that someone's going to blow up a CD shop. It just doesn't make sense. And so you can do it in gradations.
Well, to extend that further, I mean, what you're suggesting is journalists no longer operate in dangerous places, which would mean there would be no coverage of Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and other places. So it doesn't make any sense. So, you know, journalists, that's what we're supposed to do, is take our chances, you know, and clearly right now there are no-go areas. And in fact, one of our colleagues, Neo Rosen, at the New America Foundation, was in Quetta and got a call from the government essentially saying, you know, you're going to be the second Danny Pearl if you don't leave. So Quetta is, and why is Quetta off limits? Well, Quetta is off limits because until quite recently, Mullah Omar was effectively living there. So, there, as Nick says, it's sort of a convenient excuse, and there'll be plenty of journalists who are willing to take their chances. It's not the world's most dangerous place by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, do we have another question out there? Sir in the back.
David Bilchik. The atomic weapons technology program, you guys have not mentioned that at all. Does that have any relevance to what's going on today?
It's the AQ Khan. Does he have any relevance to the
You
story?
didn't poll, like, if you would have a poll in the next election? Presumably, he polled very well, right?
Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to thank you all, thank this great panel for being here. The United States has really outdone itself in terms of beating India in terms of the most feared nation in the Pakistani eyes. And hopefully we can improve that. But thank you for coming to the New America Foundation, and we'll see you again.